The Survivors is brought to you by our friends at the Help Hub. This podcast mentions suicide, mental illness, grief, and loss, and may be triggering for some listeners. So please take care of your mental well-being by pausing or skipping any sections that feel uncomfortable to you. And if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 for support. We're very glad you're here because this is a conversation that I know that I've wanted to have for a really, really long time. I've had it a million times in lots of other places, platforms, podcasts, and I am so excited to have it here. And I know you are too. And it's why we need to stop saying committed suicide. I'm so excited that we have an entire conversation dedicated to this one thing, because in my own opinion, as a suicide loss survivor 3 times over, it has become so visceral to me when I hear someone say committed suicide, because I understand the kind of damage that's done when someone says it. And so I'm so excited to have a conversation where we explain why we need to stop doing that, and that that's one of the critical steps in changing the narrative on mental illness and suicide.
Like when I had my attempt, that was the other thing that was going through my mind, is like, how are people going to define what I did to myself? And how is this going to affect other people? I was in that type of frame of mind. I was close. If I hadn't called 988, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I know. And I've said it before and I'll say it a million more times. I am so grateful that you learned about that number and that you had the presence of mind to call that number, because now we get to do this and we get to hopefully inspire other people to call that number or feel differently about struggling and reaching out and not being okay. So let's talk about this, because it's like burning a hole in my heart. So I want you to think for a second about how language shapes things like stigma, and that the words that we use matter so, so much. And when we say something like committed suicide, we put that word committed, attach it to suicide. It really stems from a time in our history, in our collective history, when suicide was considered a sin or a crime. And in some places, unfortunately, it kind of still is. And when we say committed suicide, it's reinforcing things like shame and guilt and this whole idea that suicide is this moral failing rather than a mental health crisis or the result of unbearable emotional pain, which is what it is. It is not a crime. It is not immoral. It is not illicit. It is a product of depression, which is a product of mental illness. And words matter. And the way we talk about things shapes and frames the way people think about those things. Does that all make sense?
It does, because when we say things other than committed suicide, we're helping to break down that stigma, because there's so much stigma in this arena. And then you add on the mental health aspect to it. Then you add on vets, men, children, women, the whole 9 yards. When you say the words committed suicide, it also implies, like you said, guilt and shame. Like for the survivors, there's so much more that goes into that, and it makes it hurt even more.
It does, because it unfairly stigmatizes the person who chose to end their life. And we have to remember that when someone is mentally ill, when they're in a headspace where they are absolutely desperate and hopeless and in pain, in absolute pain, all they want is for that pain to end. And that's where it comes from. That's where the decision to end your life comes from. It's not because most people want to escape their family or escape their job or escape responsibility, or it's not like that quick exit for those reasons. It's an exit out of the pain that they're in. And at that point, probably when someone is at that stage where they're so totally hopeless, well, that's the only thing they can control. Because clearly if someone is that affected by their mental illness, and depression and they can't see any light whatsoever in their life, they just don't have control anymore. And so that's a way that someone can regain, even in a final act, can regain that control over their life by making the decision to make it stop. And unfortunately, that is a surefire guarantee that it will stop. It just stops everything. It doesn't just stop the pain. And that's the shitty part about mental illness, is that it hijacks your common sense. Depression, that's a sneaky little conniving bitch, because it sneaks into your thoughts and corrupts your ability to rationally think about something, and your ability to see that, okay, like I'm in a bad place right now. I'm in a bad headspace or a bad situation, and this is sucking right now, but it will not always be this way. It will not always look this way. It will not always feel this way. There's another side. You can't see that. Could you? Before you called 988, where was your headspace before you called 988?
It was all over the place. I just wanted it to stop. I couldn't get the voices in my head to stop. I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't find my footing. I couldn't even describe to you how I was feeling because I didn't understand it. And by the time I got to the point where I picked up the phone and called 988, I was kind of relieved, because now somebody put a voice to what was going on in my head. It's a scary place. And when you don't understand what's going on and you can't put words to it, it makes it even worse.
Yeah. And then when the words that you are putting to it are words like committed, and let's isolate that word for a split second and think about the connotation. In so many ways, the word committed has a very negative connotation, because you think commit a murder, commit a sin, commit a felony, commit adultery. Like those are not positive things. There's no spin on those. Those are negative things. So you're unfairly stereotyping the person who's dealing with mental illness. Would you ever do that to someone who had cancer? Would you ever do that to someone who had heart disease, or who died in some kind of an accident? Like, no one's stereotyping those people or stigmatizing those people or having issues talking openly about what happened to those people, because nobody thinks that there's anything wrong. It's like, oh, that poor person. It was beyond their control. Well, guess what? Everybody who's listening right now to this conversation, so is mental illness. In so many ways, it is beyond the person's control. But what it is still an illness that needs to be treated in the same way that you would treat any of those other illnesses. And it just sucks that for centuries, since the beginning of time, when people started taking their own lives, whenever that began, suicide was illegal and it was immoral and it was taboo, and that stuck. And you know why it stuck? It stuck because of the language that we used. And even though, okay, sure, a lot of the laws in our modern day society have changed in a more positive way to reflect an understanding that it's not immoral, illegal, or illicit, it's still stigmatized. People are still afraid to say, oh, my person died by suicide, or I'm a survivor of an attempt. And it needs to change. It needs to change, because any of these narratives around mental illness and suicide won't ever really truly change unless the language we use to talk about them changes first.
Right. Like, good alternatives to committed suicide are they took their own life.
Mm-hmm.
We we lost them to suicide.
Died by suicide.
Died by suicide, yeah.
People are saying they suicided. I don't personally say that as much, but I'm hearing it more and more and more, and it's becoming very, very commonplace. But there are so many other ways. And you know what that does? It preserves that person's dignity.
Yes. Or even like died as a result of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
But like, just be kind. Be kind, because when someone loses their life to suicide, there's so much grief behind that. So much. much more than like if somebody had gotten hit by a car or died of natural causes. When somebody gets to that point, and speaking for myself, you have a million things going through your head, and it is the scariest thing. It's the scariest place to be.
I'm sure.
So, going back to the word of the year, just be kind. Use your kind words. It's unfair. I was trying to think of a better word, but apparently I'm having a brain fart today. So
That's okay. That's okay. You're allowed.
it happens when you almost 62. The other thing around using the words committed suicide, there's so many connotations to it. Like if you're talking to the spouse or a friend or a coworker, it makes people feel uncomfortable if you say they lost their life to suicide or they took their life. That has a softer tone to it. And yes, suicide is still a taboo word out there. I don't understand why it shouldn't be, just as mental health is still taboo. Get over it, people. It's still happening. It happens on a daily basis. And the world's not helping with that.
No, it's not. And you did a great job of highlighting a lot of the alternatives to saying committed suicide and what to replace it with. And when you say something like died by suicide or ended their life or took their life, those are phrases that will acknowledge that person's death without judgment or without blame. And that's the end game. That's the idea. That's how we change it and how we open up the conversation so that it's not so hard and scary and hurtful and taboo anymore. It's just, it is what it is. And you're not stigmatizing the person who's attached to it anymore.
It also honors the pain and the humanity because now you can focus on the suffering and the mental illness
Yeah.
rather than the act itself. And
Right.
it's easier to support the survivors, right? Because when you are thinking about taking your life, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of mental, like, bingo going on in your head. Like, okay, well, if I do this, like, how's this going to affect people that will be talking about me later on after I've taken my life? Um, it,
Yeah.
it's really hard, and it's really hard on the survivors. So, use your kind words.
Struggling with your mental health, feeling lost, overwhelmed, or just alone? Well, you're not. Welcome to the Help Hub, your online destination for mental health resources, content, and tools to help you navigate whatever mental health challenges you're facing in the moment. At the Help Hub, we offer individualized resources tailored to your unique needs and community, with over 16 different categories to find exactly the kind of personalized help you need when you need it most. Because even though we all deal with many of the same challenges, we don't always experience those challenges the same way. So whether you're looking for crisis support, downloadable resources, or an extensive archive of mental health-related articles and videos, we've got you. From episodes of the Survivors Podcast for suicide loss survivors and lived experience blogs to interactive tools and professional connections, the Help Hub meets you where you are and helps you move forward with strength and support. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. Visit thehelphub.co today. Yeah, and speaking as a survivor, I know how it feels to live in the aftermath of not one, not two, but unfortunately 3 different suicides over the course of my life. And in some cases, there were elements of those deaths that were obvious. Like, in other words, what I mean by that is the why was a little bit more obvious in some cases with some than with others. Like if you take the circumstances around my father, for instance, we only knew bits and pieces, very few bits and pieces. The rest we really won't ever know. Like, what was the event? What was the thing that kind of brought them to that tipping point? And there usually isn't one thing. It's usually a lot of things, but we don't know. And then there's the guilt piece, and then there's the shame piece, which of course the word choice that we use is a huge contributor to that shame piece because now we're taught and we're teaching everyone that it's shameful because of the way we talk about it. So we can't do that. And shifting the language is such a powerful, but such a small act, but it has humongous ripple effects when you change language. It just normalizes talking about this big, ugly, scary thing openly, and it breaks down things like silence, which is always attached to suicide, and it creates room for things like prevention and for things like intervention and for things like support just by virtue of shifting the language, and it tells the people who are struggling, like, I bet when you were struggling, I know that your wife wasn't aware, people weren't aware, you're very much an extrovert, so you were just like, hoo, I'm good, I'm good. How you doing? Gee, I'm great, I'm great. I bet you would have loved to have known that you're not a criminal, you're not doing anything wrong, you're a human being, and you're in pain. And oh, by the way, there's so much help out there.
Funny you brought that up because I was just thinking about that. For those of us that present as extroverts, yes, we are happy go lucky. 9 times out of 10, you are not going to be able to tell if we're super depressed. We mask it well, not a badge of honor. If you're doing that now, please stop because I can tell you from my own experience, it doesn't help. It only really hurts. But for those of us that are extroverted, I've often heard of people saying that suicide is selfish and that you're a coward and you had so much to live for. Okay, when you're in that process, I'm just going to tell you there's a lot of shit that's going on in your head, and you're not thinking about how maybe selfish this is or how much you have to live in your life or how you're a coward. For me, I was 59 and a half when this happened. I didn't understand what was going on in my own head, and I couldn't think enough about how this was going to affect other people. But when I started to share my story, I had one or two people reach out to me and tell me what a selfish act that would have been. Don't do that, okay? Because I already felt shitty enough as it was. I don't need people to tell me what a selfish, cowardly thing that is to do. Be nice.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, and I have mentioned this in past episodes relating to my own belief systems around suicide and how much that's changed. I will absolutely own up to the fact that for a great portion of my life, so I'm almost 57, touched by suicide since I was 9 years old. So it's been, unfortunately, an ongoing relationship with grief, loss, death, suicide, that's been part of my life since the very beginning. And the first death I ever encountered was a suicide. My cousin took his life, and I was 9, and I was made aware that it was suicide. No one told me that it was selfish. No one talked to me about things like stigma because nobody was talking about it in 1978 anyway, or 1977. But I just somehow concocted this image of suicide as a selfish act. And I lived with that belief quietly in my own little head and heart. I never expressed it to anybody, but that's what I felt. And it was only when I found out the truth about my own father's suicide. He had been gone 35 years. I thought it was a heart attack. And the revelation in my story is that it wasn't a heart attack. He took his life, and I learned it by mistake 35 years later. Learning that he had mental illness and then really understanding what somebody who was in your headspace was going through or was feeling like my father was feeling, it absolutely changed everything for me. And it was like overnight. I no longer believed that it was a selfish act because I understood, but there are a lot of people out there who don't believe that still. And that's the other thing, that if you wanted to kind of pair something with changing the language around suicide, it's changing the belief system about the selfishness of it. And that's, people who are going to say that are people who are just pissed because it affected them. What do you mean you're not happy in your life? You've got everything to live for. We see all these celebrities who take their life, and it's like, you had fame, you had money, you had admiration, all these things, and why could you possibly take your life? it becomes so self-centered. Anybody who says that, who says it's selfish, because it's not about you. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, it's going to affect you if someone close to you takes their life, but it wasn't about you. It was about the pain they were in. So stop making it about you.
Oh my God, like spot on for those of us that are suicide attempt survivors. You know, there was so much that went into that day, and it had been building up and building up and building up until I got to the point where I was just done. But there's a lot of shame that goes into this, and that shame comes from everything we've learned through social media and the news and everything else. And so it's not just celebrities that are taking their life. There's like normal people like me, and life gets hard, really, really hard. And it's a shame game, and telling survivors that their partner or friend, that was a cowardly thing to do and I was selfish. And you have zero right, I mean, zero, to say anything. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. I hear my mother in my head right now, because that's something she would say to us all the time. And use your good words. Think really, really hard about if you were the survivor, right? How would you want somebody to address you? Use your nice words.
Yeah. And remember that those words that you use when they're not the nice ones, the understanding, compassionate, empathetic ones, are the ones that are perpetuating this stigma. And it's once we have these conversations over and over and over and over again and drum it into people's heads that we need to change that language, that is when the shift will happen. So you and I, from time to time, I feel like in almost every episode, one way or another, we have a call to action. It's check out the Trevor Project. It's lean into the people who are closest to you. Try therapy. We have lots of different call to actions. So here's the call to action that we have for you today, if you're listening to this conversation. Challenge yourself and the people around you to be intentional with the language that you use when you're talking about something like suicide, because you may not be one of the 94 million people in this world, around the world, who are affected in some way by suicide. But if you aren't, you're lucky. And if you aren't, you will be eventually. So listen to this conversation, absorb this conversation, internalize it, and educate your communities, educate your people. Get off your phone right now and have this conversation with your teenage kids, or have this conversation with your boomer parents who are hardwired to think that there's only one way to talk about suicide, and it's to say committed suicide. Talk to them, share this conversation, especially in the media and schools and in mental health spaces and in your book club. Like, normalize the correct language that we all need to be using, and model it. Model it gently and correctly, and make sure that you're using it appropriately so that other people can do the same.
I love that call to action. And my call to action is, if you have any questions for me as a suicide attempt survivor, or for Lisa as a suicide loss survivor, reach out to us on our DMs, or go out to our webpage. I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody. I'm still dealing with it 2 years later, but I'm in a much healthier headspace than I was Christmas Day 2022.
Yeah, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think. We want to hear what you feel. We want to hear what you say. What's your language? What do you say? Maybe you say something different than the handful of suggestions that we've given out today. We want to know. We'll circulate that. I'm always curious to see how people can do this in different ways. Like, one thing I want to shout out, and it's not really a great shout out, TikTok. I'm talking to you right now. I have real issues with TikTok, and I'll probably get shadow banned for saying this, but I cannot type the word suicide into a post on TikTok because it will get rejected. And that is the biggest bunch of bullshit. And it's what is absolutely wrong with this world right now. This is exactly the generation that we need to appeal to because they are the future. They're the ones who are going to make the changes and have to live in this environment, in this world with this issue long after we're gone. So the only way to get around saying suicide is to say unalived, which I think is ridiculous, but that's what everybody says, unalived. And I think that is a bunch of shit because we need to be saying the word. Like,
Yes.
suicide is a word that exists because it is a thing that happens at least 700,000 times a year around the country. So it's out there, friends, and we have to get used to it. And that's the only way that we're going to stop it. These are outdated narratives that we're talking about. And G, you and I are trying to do our part to help change the collective consciousness. And we hope that for everybody who listened to this conversation today, we hope it resonated. We hope it shifted something in you. If you were one of those people who was just saying it the way you were taught, no shame on you. It's just how we all grew up. It's what we all learned. But now you know there's a different way. There's a better way. So please take this to heart. Please continue this conversation with the people who are in your life. And please help in changing this narrative because it needs to be changed.
Thank you, Miss Lisa. I love this so much. Okay, now I lost my train of thought again. So it's okay. We'll end here.
Wow, we just went from super deep to swearing and just calling it quits.
Because I'm old and I can't remember what I was going to say.
I know you need to take your iron pills or something like that today. I don't know. Listen, I want you to do me a favor. After we're done here, I want you to take a nap. Anyway, hey, look, this is a great conversation,
It
and
was.
I love you a lot. I appreciate
I
you.
love you too.
I'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on The Survivors. Remember, no matter how tough things feel, you are enough, and the world needs you just the way you are. You're not alone in this journey. There's a community here, and every step forward counts. We're so grateful you took the time to listen, and we hope you'll take one day at a time. Just know there's always more light ahead.
Thanks for being here, friends. Just remember, help is out there in so many different places. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 and a trained crisis counselor like me will be there to help. You can also find an inclusive and comprehensive directory of mental health resources, tools, and content at thehelphub.co. Just remember that help is always just a call or a click away. We'll catch you next week. In the meantime, keep surviving.